Hey guys, what's going on? I wanted to do a quick video just talking about some of the updates that Brewmaster has gotten since pretty much my last video where I talked about Master of Harmony, as well as my video where I talked about the class kind of design philosophy in general going into the War Within. So recently there was a blue post from Blizzard on WoWhead about the updated beta build, which we're currently in now. And really quick, let's just pop this open and let's go through kind of the changes here. So Monk in general didn't get much. Now, the notes were a little confusing because a big change that Brewmaster also received was under the Windwalker column. So originally when I read this, I didn't get the chance to actually get onto the beta servers, in the last day or so. So I didn't know that this Chi Burst change affected Brewmaster as well, but let's quickly go through this. So basically Brewmaster had a talent buffed. Heightened Guard is one of the Octant's nodes. I'm going to talk about that here in a second, but basically it went from 50% to 40% of your max health. I'll explain kind of how that impacts the talent choice in a little bit here, but basically it was a small buff to that capstone, making it a little bit more competitive, maybe for Mythic Plus, maybe for Raid, but we'll have to see, depending on like boss tuning. And then Windwalker supposedly I thought this was just for Windwalker. Basically they redesigned Chi Burst to be a proc, which then you cast. There was a bug where Chi Burst did more damage while Storm Earth Fire, so this is obviously a direct nerf to Windwalker, or at least a bug fix. But this change here, let's talk about it, because I have some inherent issues that I'm not a fan of. I don't like proc-based gameplay. It's just, it makes the rotation and the power behind certain rotations or sequences of spells to just inconsistent, and I don't like inconsistency in this kind of game. I'm not a fan of like the warrior playstyle where you hit the buttons that light up, or the Frost Death Knight playstyle. I really like a consistent rotation. So how the class was working before this change was that you would cast Chi Burst, and if you're playing something like Path of Resurgence, which I think would be the play in Mythic Plus, though Way of 1,000 Strikes might also be solid, though this seems like a little bit more of a 1 to 3 target talent. So for Mythic Plus, you'd probably run Path. So what Path does is it improves your vitality gain for 25 seconds after casting Chi Burst and or Chi Wave, depending on what talent you're using, but in this case, we're talking about Chi Burst. So Chi Burst is cast, then for the next 10 seconds, you have Empowered Vitality Gain, which is Aspect of Harmony. You spend 10 seconds ramping this up. Then after 10 seconds, you hit Celestia Brew, which then for the next 8 to 10 seconds, you're dealing extra damage as a dot, as well as exploding for damage over additional seconds if you have any leftover vitality. So it has this interesting back-to-back 10-second windows that make for like this cohesive little burst or damage profile for the Brewmaster Monk. I thought this worked well. So the change that they made is now it procs off of damaging abilities instead. So you still have the ability on your bar here, but I can't cast it because I don't have the proc. And as I'm damaging these mobs, eventually I will get a proc that lasts for 20 seconds that allows me to cast Chi Burst, which makes this vitality gain a little bit inconsistent, which is what I'm not a fan of. I've had times where it procs back to back to back. I've had times where it procs once every minute and a half. So it really depends. This makes it feel like a little bit more reactive gameplay, which I don't believe Monk is. I think it's because of the complicated, arguably more complicated rotation than other tanks have. You want consistency, and having a 30-second cooldown that lines up with your 2-minute CD, lines up with your 1-minute CD. But here, I just procced a Chi Burst after about 45 seconds in combat. It lasts for 20 seconds. I can now cast this Chi Burst. They didn't change the cast time. It's not instant cast or anything. You still have to actually hard cast it. But once I cast this, I'm now going to gain this buff. Now, don't get me wrong. It does a lot of damage for one cast. 2.45 mil on 4 targets is nothing to scoff at. But now it makes it so Path of Resurgence is now just inconsistent with the damage gains, where you can make the argument where Way of 1,000 Strikes for Vitality Gain would be just a little bit more effective over the course of an entire dungeon, especially if you're getting unlucky like this and not getting any procs. And that's kind of my major concern with this talent. Maybe for Windwalker it's a fine change, and there is the chance it could be unintended for Brewmaster to work like this, and it's actually intended just for Windwalker, but just with some type of bug that it ended up getting implemented. But now, like, I've been in combat for, you know, a minute and 40 seconds, and I've only seen one proc of it. So I'm just not a fan of this inconsistent playstyle. It also means that when we, you know, hit Weapons of Order, while we are in this ability for a long time and we end up getting a pretty large damage gain, there's a chance that we don't end up actually benefiting from having this damage gain on the targets if we're not going to actually proc the spell, which to me is frustrating. So we'll see if I get a proc here. So I do get a proc, you know, that's fine, but 2 minutes now, and now I've only used it twice. So it's just one of those things that I'm just like, I don't think this is the play. I'm hoping it's unintended, and they meant to only have it affect the Windwalker tree and not all trees. But currently it's like this for Brewmaster, and I don't think it's a good design, and it moves away from the design philosophy of Master of Harmony. So yeah, that's my take on this. I'm not a fan. Now, don't get me wrong, does a lot of damage when it does proc. You know, 2 casts did 6 million damage. Pretty, you know, that's pretty high. And like I've said, I've had back-to-back procs. That's fine too. But there needs to be a consistency with Chi Burst for the Brewmaster, and I don't like how it's currently playing. So that's that. Let's talk about Ox Dance. So Ox Dance is a unique ability that was added into the War Within. Basically what it does is if you ever take a hit that is larger than 60% of your current health, this is obviously going to benefit you when you're sitting at, like, let's say you're sitting at 50% health, it's 60% of your current health. So it benefits you sitting at like lower. Whether this is a good or bad thing, it depends on how you look at it. I think this is generally going to be better for specifically raid with high level of boss tank buster mechanics, like in terms of damage. And in Mythic Plus, not going to be as good until you're doing higher level content, and it could be a fine defensive option. The 2 capstones here allow that you gain an Ox Dance. You gain a stack of Ox Dance when you Rising Sun Kick, so that's fine. And then Heightened Guard is what they changed. So originally it was 50%, now it's going to be 40%. This makes it a much more attractive option for Mythic Plus, especially in lower level Mythic Plus. If you are looking for defensive possibilities here, maybe if you don't want to play Anvil and Stave, maybe if you don't want to play Chi Surge and you want to play a little bit more defensive, you can put talents here. I guess you would maybe do High Tolerance or something like that. But this is now a little bit more viable. I'm fine with this. The problem with Heightened Guard and Ox Dance in general is that it's very difficult to proc. This is a fine change. I just need to actually do testing myself. I haven't had the chance to go into dungeons and like repetitively test running the same dungeon with and without Ox Dance and then comparing logs. I'm sure there's logs that are publicly available that I could look at, but generally speaking, it's a fine change. It makes it more competitive for Mythic Plus. I'm just concerned with some tuning on Stagger. Okay, so a couple other things I want to talk about is I do want to talk about Master of Harmony specifically. And then I'm going to talk about Shado-pan here in a second. But there are a couple things still going on with the Master of Harmony tree that there's still some obviously concerns with. First things first, Battled Stratagem is still bugged, and it's giving you 2 stacks every time you cast Keg Smash. That's obviously not super great, and it is going to result in higher magical damage being done. Oh, look at that, a back-to-back Chi Burst cast. Very cool. So this is when it actually ends up doing, like, oh, a triple. Look at this. Isn't that crazy? So yeah, sometimes you can't get lucky, which is cool, but I don't like inconsistent gameplay. Anyways, this bug obviously is still not good. Another thing too that they finally somewhat fixed is that Overwhelming Force now does the actual intended amount of damage, kind of. Let me drop combat really quick, and I kind of want to explain what I mean by this. So before, it wasn't doing the 15% that it was claiming. It was doing about 10.5. Probably an intern added a 0 and a decimal on accident in between the 1 and the 5. But basically, it was doing less damage than intended, which is fine. That means that when Blizzard fixes it, it's going to be doing more damage than intended, which is great. The problem now is that if we reset the data here, it's now not able to crit, which is the problem. So right there, I just got a Rising Sun Kick critical strike. But the damage is only 32k of Overwhelming Force, and as you can see, it did not crit. So as of right now, Overwhelming Force is it's incapable of critting. So you would think that, okay, maybe it's like Atonement, where your damage can crit, but the atonement cannot, but it will replicate the damage of the crit, the raw value after all modifiers have been applied to the damage. Where with this, what ends up happening, let me whip open a calculator for you. So it hit twice, right? So it hit the primary target as well as the target behind. So we only want to look at one of those hits. It averaged at a 33k hits. So we'll do a 33k. Sorry for clicking this. I'm just too lazy to actually type on my keyboard. And we're going to divide this by the critical strike of Rising Sun Kick, which was 439. Is it a decimal point at all? So 0.5. Oops. As you can see here, it's only a 7.5%. So it's not critting, and you're actually losing a good bit of damage whenever you do critically strike. And as most of you know, as Brewmaster players, critical strike is a good stat for us. It benefits us not only in the damage department, but also in the healing departments. And yeah, just all around, it's a good stat to stack. As you can see here, I actually have 30% give or take in my 614 gear. So not benefiting from crit is a big no-no. They need to fix this. I hope it's fixed. They can fix it in two ways. Either Overwhelming Force can crit, which is fine. I think the better thing to do is don't allow Overwhelming Force to crit, and this will be easier to tune, but actually make it do the 15% of everything after, like all the modifiers before the actual damage number. That's probably the best thing they can do, but if not, just allow Overwhelming Force to crit as well, which is fine. I think it'd just be easier if it can't. But if I sit here and I just keep hitting my single target abilities, you're going to notice that Overwhelming Force just like cannot crit. It will just always sit as a normal hit. Outside of that, Master of Harmony does feel very good. I'm a very big fan of this tree. Part of the reason why is because Shado-pan isn't working. Hopefully they fix that in the near future. So the last thing I do want to talk about is actually Shado-pan. So let me swap over that talent tree. So the problem with the Shado-pan tree is a lot. And I didn't talk about this in a previous video, or I might have maybe mentioned it, can't remember. So a big thing that they changed about flurry strikes is they have changed it from max health to attack power. So dealing damage equal to 350% of your attack power generates a flurry charge. For each 400 energy you spend, unleash all flurry charges, dealing 40k physical damage per charge. So if you have 10 stacks, which you're going to be doing 400k damage. Quick math on that. Now the problem is the frequency of the procs. I think they need to reduce this to 300 energy or 200 energy. So let's quickly talk about some of the bugs that are going on with this tree. First things first, the free procs we get from our tier set do not count towards total energy spent. So what's happening is our tier set is actively working against the Brewmaster Shado-pan tree. So if I sat here, so we need to spend 400 energy. Every time I keg smash, I'm spending 40 energy. So I need to do 10, right? So let's just keep hitting this over and over again. And we can actually track this based off of total casts. And it should then expend all my flurry charges because I spent 400 energy. I just need to make sure that I'm not using any other energy spells so we can actually get an accurate reading on this. So as of right now, I've cast it 4 times. We'll go 5. I'll reset with Weapons of Order just so I can send it again. And somehow it's sent after 6, which is weird. It probably was counting my previous keg smashes. Okay, hold on. I need to actually do this correctly. So right here, I've casted 9 keg smashes. So now if I hit this, it'll expend those charges. Perfect. That works. Now the problem is if we start adding in blackout kicks into our rotation, which I'll start doing here, any free keg smashes I get will not actually proc the spell. So once I hit 20 keg smashes, it should in theory proc again. So right now we're at 16, 17. So I just hit the 20 keg smash amount. Obviously I do have one little tiger palm in here from earlier, but being 35% energy shouldn't change anything. So I'm at 20. I'll hit 21. Still nothing, hasn't procced yet. Still sitting at the 10 flurry charges. We'll hit it again. Oh, 22. We still have our 10 flurry charges, still hasn't spent. So basically our tier set's working against us, which is a massive problem because it's going to detract from how frequently we actually gain Wisdom of the Wall. And that is something else that I have some issues with currently, is the Wisdom of the Wall buff. There are some that are objectively stronger than others. So for example, we can see here that the effects of your mastery are increased by 25%. This gives me 1% mastery, by the way. That's it. Not sure if it's a bug, not sure if it's supposed to be 25% of my current. Obviously, I don't have any mastery on this character. I only have 1,000 from my gear. So maybe there's a possibility where it's giving me just from my gear, and that's why it results in only a 1% mastery gain. But a 1% mastery gain is not good enough when you're on average proccing Wisdom of the Wall roughly every 50 seconds to a minute. It takes you a very long time to spend 400 energy, essentially, is my argument. If we look back at what the other options are, the critical strike damage increased by 30%. That's fine. I think it's going to scale a lot better into late game. And then dodge and critical strike chance increased by 25% of your versatility bonus. This is also weak because, I mean, unlike mastery, we do have a lot more verse than we normally would, or at least my character currently does. But that means I'm only gaining 5%. Currently, my versatility is 20% based off of the actual numbers. So that means I'm only gaining 5% dodge and 5% critical strike for 20 seconds. That's extremely weak. And lastly, the Flurry Strike deals 81,000 shadow damage to all uncontrolled enemies within 6 yards. The problem with this is that you can't proc Flurry Strikes back to back. Like, while you have this buff active for the Flurry Strike to do shadow damage, you can't proc Flurry Strikes again before the buff expires because it takes you more than 20 seconds to re-proc it. So it seems to me that there's this like really weird inherent design flaw issue with this spec. Like, I think the attack power is fine. I think maybe they can amp it up a bit, because if we go over to the training dummies, you're going to notice that I hit 10 stacks almost immediately. It's actually kind of funny how quickly in AoE you're able to hit 10 stacks. I think this change was really meant to affect raid, because doing your health pool in raid was a lot harder, but I keg smash once, I'm at 6 stacks. I blackout kick, I'm at 8. I keg smash again, I'm at 10. Literally in 3 globals, I'm able to max out my stacks. So there's some pretty big flaws with this tree currently. Now, of course, you know, some of these other nodes are working fine. The cooldown reduction on Weapons of Order is great. One versus many, increasing our keg smash damage is great. But the like, you can see here that it increases the flurry charge generation, but like that doesn't matter. Even if they removed that aspect of it, we're going to be hitting 10 stacks almost immediately before we expend. So what I think they need to do is they need to cut this down to like 200 energy. Because then you're going to proc this. With how weak the Wisdom of the Wall buff is, in my head, I'm thinking you're going to have this like weird overlap. Like, as you're in combat, you'll have 2 of these actives at all times, and not like permanently, but like you'll have one active, it'll be active for 15 of the 20 seconds, and then you'll proc another Wisdom of the Wall, and then it'll be different. So it should be this rotating buff almost, and not this like weird little, like, I mean, obviously this is not efficient combat, but I mean, your Wisdom of the Wall buff has like a 17% uptime. Like, it's very low. It's very bad, and it does not feel good to play currently. You just can't really play this tree at all. So that's everything that's kind of going on with the Brewmaster currently. I'm waiting for Shado-pan to get a clear needed overhaul. I'm not sure how it's performing for the Windwalker Monk. I obviously have concerns if it's doing this for the Brewmaster, but Master of Harmony does feel really good. There are some kind of minor bugs here, and I think the Chi Burst rework was just not great. Anyways, that's everything I kind of wanted to talk about. I will be, man, I've been working a lot lately, but I'm hoping to get to do some testing here in the near future, as well as some of the other tanks, so keep an eye out for those. Anyways, a massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters, because without you guys, I wouldn't be able to make videos like this. Hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.